everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, occasionally agents, just anyone in the publishing game, to learn a little bit more about them, their work, and hopefully how their experiences can help you on your own writing journey. If you are crazy enough to want to get into this industry, I have a lot of guests who can help answer some of your burning questions. Before I introduce today's guest, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. And if you like what you see today, do me a solid. Please tell a friend. It really is even more than reviews and becoming a subscriber. It's the best way for endeavors like this one to gain an audience. Though a nice review is also great, and I deeply appreciate subscribers and nice reviews. So, enough of the commercial. I will come back to that later, though. My guest today is an award-winning author of a dozen books, including three different multi-book series and two standalones. I can't tell you how difficult it is to get a series into publication in this day and age. So that is a true feat. She's also a veteran journalist who has reported from more than a dozen countries over her long career. And now she's back in the newsroom, serving as an interim editor at the Seattle Times. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But somehow between books and the news, she also finds time to produce a Substack newsletter. I mean, I'm tired even saying all those words. So anyway, without further delay, please welcome my guest today, the very, very talented Gwen Florio, to the open mic, Writers in Their Own Words. Gwen, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great, and thank you for that introduction. And I want to make sure my mother didn't write it because that was lovely. Thank you.
Well, it's the least I can do for my guest to come on and share some time is to give you a good intro. But it's all true. I don't over promote anything. I don't think because all everything I said in that intro is true. And we're going to get to a lot of the writing stuff, but I just have to start off because fellow journalists. I saw that you're back into the Seattle Times newsroom. Tell me a little bit. How does it feel being back in the newsroom during these very strange times that we are living in?
That was one of the appeals about coming back. So I've been retired now for, gosh, 2 or 3 years, maybe more. It kind of blurs when you retire. And
Uh-huh.
a lovely blur it is. But a few weeks ago, I got a call. My former editor at the Missoulian in Montana, where I worked for many years, is also a former Seattle Times editor. And through the very close-knit world of journalism, she let me know that they were looking for an interim editor for the summer. And as you mentioned, these are strange times we're in. They are newsworthy times. And the idea of jumping back into a newsroom in the midst of this and in Seattle in the summer, you know, um, some really attractive reasons to do it. And I'm just having a blast.
Well, you mentioned Seattle in the summer, and we were talking before we came on the air
Mhm.
here, of course, my wife lived and worked in Seattle for many, many years, and I've not lived there, but I've been in Seattle for work many, many times aside from that. And
Mhm.
it is interesting. You go there in the summer and you think, oh my gosh, I have to move here. This is the greatest place ever.
Right,
Then you go there when it's not summer and you realize, I haven't seen the sun in 150 days, right?
right.
And it's been drizzling the whole time.
Yeah, I got a
So,
little taste of that when I first came out here. I think the first couple of weeks were kind of gray and dreary. Not hard rain, but never quite dry. And then the sun came out and stayed out, and
yeah.
it's just been amazing.
You learn there if you're an outdoors person, which of
Yeah,
course we are. If you can't handle the rain, you're in the wrong place. Because if you
right,
only go out when it's sunny, you don't get to do much
right.
outdoors in the Seattle area. But lovely city, one of my favorite cities in the world. Absolutely adored Seattle. So, but let's talk about the brand new book. I love
Okay.
this. It's called A Senior Citizen's Guide to Life on the Run, and it's drawn some really great reviews across the board. Uh, Tell us all a little bit about it.
Yeah, this book is such a departure for me. I had most of my other books are pretty straightforward mysteries. And my publisher, Severn House, said to me, about my previous series with them. They're like the series started off being fairly lighthearted, and that book sold very well, and then it got progressively serious. And when I think back, those books were written during the pandemic, which may have had a little bit to do with that, but they wanted another more lighthearted book. And so I sent them some proposals. They locked in on this one, but when they announced it as a cozy. And I kind of was taken aback because I don't think of myself as writing cozies. And I really had to get into a different headspace. In some ways, it was the most difficult book I've ever written because it took me a while to get the voice right, to kind of wrap my head around that concept. And then when I finally did, I really had fun with it. And it was good to have that kind of a challenge.
Well,
As
and
much
that's
as
a big departure because
very big
there are rules around cozies that are
rules.
very different from if you're writing noir or thrillers or more mainstream or traditional mystery or crime fiction. And so yeah, I'm sure it took a little bit of a different mindset to get
Right.
that one across the finish line.
Right. And what I started doing was thinking of it as humorous, and that really helped. I thought it was kind of funny. One of the reader reviews said the reader didn't finish the book because of the profanity. I am sure that this is the first book I've ever written without an F-bomb in it. I was like, come on.
That is funny. Well, I was going to ask a question about humor later, but I'm going to ask it now
Okay.
because I love the name of the senior community in this book. And just very quickly, this is the characters in this book are of a certain age, shall we say,
Mhm.
and which is part of the themes here. Um, but the name of the senior community where this starts out is Timeless Pastures. And as someone who's in his 60s now too, I laughed the first time I saw it. I said, that's great. But there's also some biting commentary a little bit right there, even in that name. And as you noted,
Right.
there's more humor in this than any of your previous novels.
Hmm.
So tell me a little bit about how you infuse humor into your work, because it's not easy to just change things and be funny, right? Funny is very
Right.
subjective anyway, but humor maybe isn't even quite the same as funny. So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about the mindset that you applied to that.
Well, and especially with dealing with mysteries, because someone's got to be killed.
Right.
So you're walking a little bit
Even
of
in
a
a
fine
cozy,
line there.
someone has to die.
Someone's dead. There's, yeah. I always look to Carl Hyacin as the king, the emperor, the god of all humorous mysteries. And I kind of had that in the back of my mind. Part of it is putting people in ridiculous situations. Part of it is having fun with the stereotype of people of a certain age, and I am definitely one, of being sweet and kind of dotty. I mean, I really find those stereotypes offensive. And when you look at people, especially of this generation, and a little bit older, they came up in the 60s. They they have some very interesting pasts. And I had fun with that also. And had fun with them taking advantage of people reacting to them as helpless old people when they are very, very far from helpless.
Absolutely. Anyone who thinks that never met my mother.
Yeah.
Um, we met at Left Coast Crime, actually in Bellingham, Washington, I think. I think that
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
one in Seattle.
Hmm.
And I moderated a panel there with writers whose work has often addressed issues of social justice.
Hmm.
And I was really grateful to moderate that panel. Aside from getting to meet some really, really great authors, this is an issue, social justice is an issue that as reporters, it touches us. Um, so this book, like many of your previous novels,
Hmm.
even though that's more of a humorous novel, it does weave a lot of similar
Right.
themes of social justice throughout the story. As I noted, we're living in times where social justice is greatly at risk. The day we are recording this, which is a few weeks before you're going to be listening or watching this, there's a lot of stuff going on here in my state, in California, down in Southern California, That, I'll be honest, is just scary as hell. Um, but tell me a little bit about some of the themes in this book that deal with social justice.
Sure, a lot of it had to do with economic insecurity when you get to be a certain age. A lot of it had to do with the housing crisis in this country. And as you noted, pretty much all of my other books deal as a subplot with some social justice issue, and I wanted to weave that in here. And that was my thought. And as you said, a lot of it comes with my background as a reporter. The nice thing about writing fiction is I can delve into issues I cared about very much as a reporter. And I still report them deeply. You know, I look into, I don't know, government papers on this sort of thing. I do a lot of research. Uh, but no one in fiction ever says no comment. So I'm not
Right,
trying to pull information out of people who don't want to give it to me. I can put it on the page myself, which I really enjoy.
right. You know, it can be very challenging, I think, for some writers, and especially newer writers,
Mhm.
to include diverse characters in their work without making them stereotypes.
Right.
Um, Tell me a bit about your thought process when you are creating characters, diverse or otherwise,
Mhm.
and you know, trying to ensure that they are not just stereotypes or tropes.
Right. That is something really tricky. And gosh, I've done it in most of my books with a lot of trepidation. But A, we live in a diverse society. I mean, the last thing I want to do is write about people just like me. I always say, there's not anything much more boring than a middle age or beyond middle age now, middle class white woman living in suburbia. Let's juice this up a little bit. Again, so I do want characters of different ethnicities, different social classes. And as you said, the really strong trick is not to slip into tropes. There is a black woman in this book. She is not the sassy black sidekick. That just, the thought of that just makes my blood run cold. There is a bisexual person in here, and that just kind of happened. I mean, a lot of times it just kind of happens organically. It lets me touch on some issues without getting too serious about them, but letting people know those things are out there. Um, and again, I want my books to be representative of a place and a society in a certain time. So that's why I do that. I always say, if I get it wrong, I'm going to hear about it and deservedly so. I mean,
Right,
I'm really wary of cultural appropriation. I think that's an issue we should be concerned about, but I also think writers should not be afraid to write about people who are not like them. And certainly in our crime writing community, we're writing about killers.
right,
So I
right,
think that gives us a certain, a certain amount of sense of writing about people very different than us, I hope.
right, right. Well, yeah, and I always find that interesting because and regular viewers slash listeners of the show know if they've heard this story from me before, but my father was indigenous from Mexico City,
Hmm.
right around Mexico City, but I was not raised with that. I was raised by my mother, who was absolutely not
Hmm.
that culture. And so in my manuscript that my agent has right now that she's shopping, I have what I think are some, very diverse characters, but I was really cognizant of not trying to act like I had some insight into, my friends who really were raised in Hispanic culture or indigenous culture. And so I had a lot of them read my stuff just to make sure, not that
Right.
it's a heavy part of it, but just to have on little things where I made certain references, like, did I get that right? Am I using something right
Mhm.
here, or do I come across as some, middle-aged white dude from the burbs who's thinking he's cool? And so that was helpful. That's a long-winded lead into, do you ever or have you ever used readers for that purpose as just cultural readers to see if there's a aspect of something that you got right or wrong that is worth noting?
Right, absolutely. Not so much in this book, But especially when I wrote a series set in the West, and a number of those books took place in or around Indian reservations.
Hmm.
Each reservation has a cultural council. And so I would call them and say, hey, I have this in my book. I have that in my book. I would go through, I had a whole number of examples. Am I getting this right? And not only did they sometimes, help me steer a different course, but added information that really enriched the book, which I deeply appreciated. And I wrote a standalone set in Pakistan and Afghanistan. My web designer is Pakistani. And I was like, help. And she read through the manuscript and caught some just ways I had worded things or phrases I had used. And she said, that's not quite where you would use that particular phrase. That was really helpful. And boy, I wholly subscribe to doing that, because the alternative, again, is making a mistake. And you don't want to do that
Right.
in anything, in any part of your writing.
Once it's out there too. It's
Yeah,
so hard to pull back.
yeah.
Um, a lot of the reviews of your work, no, and all your work, not just the new book, but going back to your other series as well, really note your ability to infuse characters with a high degree of humanity.
Oh,
For me, humanity and empathy go
hmm,
hand in hand. And I also think that empathy is an absolute requirement for a good journalist.
hmm.
No emphasis on good. Tell me a bit about your career as a reporter and how that career has impacted your work as a novelist.
Boy, I think one of the things I loved most about journalism was that almost all the time, unless we're talking like a zoning board meeting, and sometimes even then, you were talking to interesting people about interesting things. And I was just enchanted by that. The hard part was when you had to sit down and write the story. But if you had just paid me to go around and talk to people all the time and find out new things, it would have been perfect. Um, so I think, again, that factor of journalism bled over into my fiction, in that it helped me, always listening for the good quote as a journalist, for the way a person spoke or phrased something or said the thing that just summed up the story just right, really helped me write dialogue when I made the switch to fiction. I think that helped a lot, but mostly I think as a novelist, I'm as interested in my characters as I was as a journalist in the people I was interviewing. It sounds so stereotypical, but they become fairly real people to me. And when I have to hurt one of them, I feel really bad, unless it's a person who really deserves it. And then I feel great. Uh,
Right,
but if it's someone I like, I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is how it's got to be.
right.
Uh,
Love that.
yeah.
Well, also, as reporters, you learn deadlines. That's the thing, man.
That's
Discipline. You
huge,
have to be disciplined to do
huge.
this. It's I know my own successful times are when I'm being very disciplined, and my lack of success is usually when I'm not.
Right. And I always say, especially to writers who are just starting out, and I've had people say, well, I need to be inspired. I'm like, nah, nah, no, you don't. Because then you'll never get anything done. And day after day, I wake up and I'm like, God, I don't know what I'm going to write today. But if you sit down and put your fingers on that keyboard and just start to write crap, eventually your brain will go, knock it off. Here,
Yeah,
I'm going to give you a sentence that actually works, and then you can maybe follow it with and you can edit the crap out.
right.
But you've just got to do it. And that is my process, I would say, the majority of the time. Every so often you get a day where it just sings, and
Yeah.
then like, oh, I finally figured this out. And then the next day we're back to normal.
Oh yeah. But my dogs are the great beneficiaries of my plot struggles because then we go take these
Right.
miles long walks, right? But
Hmm.
just and since they don't talk to me, I can actually have some space in my head, and
Yeah.
I have solved so many plot problems, sticking points by just getting out and then it's the rush back to get it all done. But
Right.
yes,
And I'm a big fan of that. I think there's like some scientific evidence that when you're moving or if you're doing the dishes, something that kind of occupies your body but not your mind will drift to the right place that's going to help your book.
I believe it. Yeah. Second on journalism for a minute, because you've reported from some very dangerous locales,
Mhm.
Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, many other countries. What's the toughest situation you've ever been in, and how did you ever use, or how much maybe of what some of your situations you've encountered in your life, have you
Yeah.
infused into any of your work?
Certainly the book I wrote that was set in Pakistan and Afghanistan, I put a lot of the situation because again, you're talking about a culture so different than my own that I wanted, say, I had attended a wedding. The wedding was awesome. And so I was able to put a wedding scene in my book that one of my characters got married and describe it as I had observed it. So and again, I could ask the person who's my web designer, is what was happening at this point in the wedding, what I think was happening, that kind of thing. Or I went to a bakery in Kabul and I was able to describe that whole process. So, and that, that's just straight reporting, basically. Um, One of the things about being in some of those places, and especially in Afghanistan, well, also Iraq, was deep freaking fear of being killed, where you're thinking, man, is a newspaper story worth this?
Right.
And I think that helps me when I put my characters in really desperate situations. I remember that horrible sense of dread, and not
Did you
knowing
have
whether,
any situations like that where, you were helmeted up hiding under a car or something?
actually going into Baghdad right after they pulled that statue down. So it was like within a day or two, a number of us were on a bus. I'm not sure how we ended up on this bus, but we were driving into the city and it was just chaos. Buildings were on fire, huge four-story buildings, and people were looting like mad. They were running out of these buildings with like toilets on their backs and desks on their backs. But then a mob surrounded the bus. I think there was a caravan, and they were like trying to break out the windows with bits of rebar. And that's when I just thought, this is not going to be a good way to go.
Right. Wow.
And out of nowhere, this beautiful American tank came down the street. And it was the most gorgeous sight I had ever seen. And they went away. We got to where we were going safely, but yeah, that was bad.
Wow, yeah, that's serious. That's some serious stuff right there.
Yeah.
Um, your first novel,
Hmm.
Montana, was the first in your Lola Wicks series, and I believe you had five of
Five.
those, right?
Yeah.
Now it won several awards and it established your foothold in the fiction world. All of that is great, but that was not your first stab at fiction, correct?
It was not. No, in fact, the book about Afghanistan was my first stab, and that got rejected and rejected. And I kind of fell into writing novels as a result when my then agent said to me, your book is not going to sell. Those are words every writer loves to hear.
Yeah.
And what else are you working on? The second thing every writer loves to hear. And now I know that the minute I finish one manuscript, I open up a new file and start, write chapter one. But at the time, all I had was a fragment of something that I had abandoned because it could only turn into a mystery. And I didn't think of myself as writing mysteries. So I said to her, oh, I'm working on a mystery. And that fragment that I had basically is word for word the first chapter of that book.
Wow.
So dumb
It
luck.
pays off to be flexible.
Yeah, yeah.
You've been through a lot of writers' retreats and workshops,
Hmm.
which I find fascinating because I've never been to one. And I was hoping
Oh,
you might
great.
share with me a little bit about those experiences and what made them so valuable to you.
Oh my God. Especially when I was still working full time, the idea of being able to step away from work and from family life, as lovely as families are, they demand attention.
Yes.
The dogs demand attention. The bills demand attention. And to be able to go away when I was working, I could only do 2-week residencies. And this is something you apply for and, send off copies of your work and you get recommendations and it's a thing. Um, but then, and after I retired, I could do month-long residencies. To have that time to do nothing but write or think about writing or not write if you feel like it. Although I was always so, watching the days tick by, I was like, let me get this done, is just the most wonderful gift in the world. I think it's what all writers dream about. I mean, it's what you think you could do if you could make enough money from your writing to quit your job, which
Right.
very, very few people do. But for that 2 weeks or that month, you got to do it. And then frequently they're also in really lovely places. Like I've done them in Wyoming and Alaska, which was just heavenly, and Washington State. And I've done a couple now in Italy, which was really lovely.
Yeah, that one I saw that. That one I was very jealous of. That's
Yeah,
Italy's a fabulous country.
it's pretty wonderful.
Yeah,
It's
I could see hanging out there for a little bit. That'd be
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Um, Also really quick, because I know writers, you mentioned the dream of being able to make a living.
Hmm.
Yes. A lot of writers, when they're first getting started, they have a lot of misconceptions about this life. And one of them
So
is that, oh,
many.
they're going to get that first book published and it's going to be a big hit. And then they're going to go on a big
Yep,
fancy book tour. I've talked with enough writers and I've heard a lot of less than fancy book tour stories. But I'm curious because I've read where you had one too that was pretty
I
less than
did.
fancy. I thought maybe you could would share that with us.
I put this together myself. It was in the summer, which was key. And I forget which book I did this with. I think it was one of the Lola Wicks books, but I'm not sure now. But I was living in Montana at the time. So I did a swing through Western states, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. Did I go somewhere else? Maybe. Um, and I camped the whole way. Um, I had a little tent and I had a truck and I had a camp stove. And the key to that was finding campgrounds with showers. So I could, before I went to do my reading or my event, I would jump in the shower and put on a cute dress and I'd go off to a bookstore and then I'd come back and I'd cook ramen noodles on my little camp stove, which ended up being a lot of fun, I have to say. I love the West. I love driving around the West. Someday I still would like someone to pay for me and fly me around and feed me and so on, but not holding out hope.
I have a friend who went to a book signing in another state.
Hmm.
And then, his publisher was sending him there, so he didn't have to pay for it. But
Yeah.
he sat there for 3 hours in a Barnes and Noble and didn't have a single person come to see him.
I've had that experience. And what is interesting is that I made good friends with the bookstore owner, and we're still Facebook friends. And I had this was a reading on Bainbridge Island years ago, and hardly anyone showed up. But the couple who showed up, we've stayed in touch ever since. I consider us, again, we've gone through some really tough family things, similarly that we've been in correspondence about. And I value those connections you make, even if hardly anyone shows up. Sometimes it's almost worth it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, lemons to lemonade, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Along those lines, this is a quick hitter thing here because people ask me for some reason this
Hmm.
kind of question all the time. But what's the best advice that you've ever received about writing? And maybe conversely, what's the worst
Oh
advice?
boy.
Except maybe aside, I guess, from coming on this show. But I mean, what's the best
No.
advice you ever got?
Let me think about this. Well, a lot of it, one of the ones I'd heard that I had to learn the hard way myself was don't sit around and wait for the good things to happen. Just keep writing. You've got to make your own luck a lot in this business. As I said with that first book, I did. I sent out a manuscript and thought I had a New York agent, that was going to make my career. Didn't happen. And I did not have another book at the ready. And I tell people this all the time. When you finish that first book, start the second one. Even if you haven't sold the first one, start the second one because the first thing a potential agent and or publisher wants to know is what else do you have? They don't want a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
So you've
Yeah.
got to be sure you've got that other one or two or three waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, hugely important. And the worst is write what you know. Um, I mean, I get that in a way, but again, white, aging, middle class, suburban woman, come on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Much as with, again, journalism, part of writing fiction about things I don't know is I get to research things that to me are different and interesting and kind of do them vicariously. And that's one of the great pleasures of writing for me.
Yeah, the right what you know thing is interesting to me because, I've been working in politics for decades and it
Hmm.
is the last thing in the world I want to write about. I have to do it all the time to make a living, and I'm fortunate I
Hmm.
can make a good living doing this, but I don't want to do it on my fiction time too. I
Yeah.
mean, Tony Hillerman, who was in the conversation of my top three favorite authors ever, wrote
Hmm.
one book where it was a reporter covering politics, and then he never wrote another one. All the rest were his Jim Chee, this
Hmm.
Navajo Tribal Police series. And I'm so glad he did that because I loved Fly on the Wall, but I would not have wanted to read 20 of those books. I read
Right.
every other book he ever wrote, in
Right.
addition to that one. But yeah, I think sometimes writing what you know,
Hmm.
I agree with you. It can work, but what fun
Yeah.
is that? Last serious question here, because I noted
Hmm.
a couple times here that we're in very challenging times.
Very.
And writers are often told not to get political because in their work, because it could
Hmm.
alienate some potential readers, aka book buyers, or maybe not even just in their work, but also, in this day and age, social media or some other place. Have you ever been told that, hey, lay off the social justice stuff, it's not helping? One, and then I guess the follow-up is, does it ever enter your mind now thinking about your future work?
Oh, hell no. Um, I was told once, I thought it was good advice, and I have two books written about a public defender, and in one, the subplot involved an election, speaking of politics. And I had made it a national election. I think this was during the Trump 1 era. And I don't know whether it was my editor or publisher was like, yeah. And what I did was I switched it to a local election, which actually made the book a lot stronger because suddenly then you had people in the community. You had a lot of the same themes
Right.
playing out, but they were people who were interacting with each other rather than off on the national stage. So that worked well. But I can't imagine not including this stuff. I'm going to be really curious to see what kind of fiction comes out of this era. I mean, I think I've used the phrase, the word Gilead or Handmaid's Tale over and over again, just talking about things. Um, I don't think it's good immediately to be writing about something as it's happening, or at least for me, I think I would want time to digest it.
Yeah.
But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what do I use? This
Yeah.
is just for all that it's an awful time to go through. It's so rich. And when you look at, fiction across the decades, like what came out of Eastern Europe,
Hmm.
for many years, what came out of South Africa, what came out of Ireland and Northern Ireland, uh,
Iran, Pakistan.
so many places.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Horrible times are really good for writers.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure we would have seen things like A Tale of Two Cities and other things,
Right. And there's that. Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Well, and by the way, I also agree with you on the local thing, and it's because this, I think now we all have this from, House of Cards and so many of the other
Hmm.
things that are visual things, TV and movies. We all have this idea of what national politics is like, and I don't know if you can mine too much fresh ground there, but I
Right.
think one of the most interesting things about movies like Jaws and the
Hmm.
novel Jaws was that it was local because
Right.
those pressures are very different.
Right.
It's easy to make the mayor the ultimate bad guy in
Hmm.
Jaws, but imagine the pressure that he was under to keep those
Sure.
beaches open. and not just for his own political success, but for the welfare of the town, right?
Right.
I thought
Right.
Benchley did a really fabulous job of not necessarily making him some, horribly
Right.
corrupt person. I mean, he did have some
Mhm.
legitimate responsibility there, and I think a lot of that is we as we all live in a community somewhere. We can
Mhm.
relate to that a little bit. So I think that that was a good call. Well, I always like to wrap things up.
Okay.
And what I like to think is a fun question. I hope it's a fun question. I'm going to become the omnipotent Rich Eisen and say I can put you together with one of the following three people. You can have dinner, drinks, Italian food, whatever you want, and but you only get to choose one. There is a theme. There's always some connective tissue between these three people. Most people figure it out pretty quickly what that is, but we'll see if you do or not. But the
Okay.
people I'm going to offer you are uh, George Thorogood, Aubrey Plaza, and Jeff Pearlman. So musician, actress, reporter.
You
Who would
know,
you choose and why?
come on. It's got to be George Thorogood, the Delaware Destroyers. I went to the Deer Park in Newark, Delaware in college where they played, where the floor, and actually when we moved back to the East Coast from Montana, one of the first places I took my husband was the Deer Park. Floors are still pretty sticky. He's like, why are we going here? So it would have to be George Thorogood.
Awesome, awesome. I had a feeling. I just had a
Yeah.
feeling, but yes, I'm as a huge George Thorogood fan. I actually I'm a big fan of all those people. Jeff's actually a friend of mine.
Cool.
Obviously, the first two are from Delaware.
Yeah.
Jeff is from New York, upstate New York, but he went to the University of Delaware. So there's our connective tissue that, and
Okay.
you, of
Pretty
course,
good.
are a Delaware native. So
Yeah.
I am not surprised at all that you picked up on that quite quickly, the Delaware connection. So Gwen, this has been fabulous. I really appreciate you coming on the open mic. I really hope everybody out there got something out of this that will help you in with your own writing, or if you know someone else that is looking to write their words and have whatever level of success. The thing I always tell people, and I don't know if this is good advice or not, but the thing I always tell people because they ask me for some reason
Mhm.
about these things, and I say the most important thing I think is you got to know what you want,
Right.
whatever it is.
Right.
If all you want to do is indie publish and see your name on a book cover, great. If you want to get a deal with HarperCollins, great. They're very different, and you just have to know what goes into each one of them and deciding what it is you're willing to do to get there. And so
That
that's
is
that's
terrific advice.
that's yeah, that's my little bit. That's the one thing I've learned. God damn, the hard way. I have learned it.
Yeah. Always. Always.
Yes, yes, because I like you. I thought, oh, I have an agent. I'm going to be a success. Yeah, I'm on my third one. You know,
Same. Same.
it's that you learn stuff. So anyway, I
Yeah.
really appreciate you coming on, sharing all these wonderful insights and your sense of humor and everything that goes into this business because you got to have that if you're going to survive.
Very much so. Thank you so much. It's been great. I really appreciate this.
Absolutely. And for, if people, if you're looking to check out Gwen's first book in the cozy genre, even if she didn't intend it to be that way,
Right.
A Senior Citizen's Guide to Life on the Run. It's a great read. I highly recommend it. And before I sign off, I'll say the same thing that I always say to everybody. I mean it every time. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please, whatever you do, make today count. So for myself, for my guest, Gwen Florio, for my two crazy English setters, Stella and Pippa, who have cooperated so greatly at snoozing off to the left and not interrupting this podcast slash YouTube show. This has been Rich Eisen and the open mic. We will see you next time.